dear students of Masters of Arts belonging to English department. At the outset of my lecture, I would like to welcome all of you. Our today's discussion will be on T.S. Eliot's Tradition and Individual Talent. Look at Tradition and Individual Talent, an essay by T.S. Eliot. From this writing of the board, it is quite clear to you that it's an essay by T.S. Eliot. Okay, and today I will mainly focus on general discussion on T.S. Eliot's Tradition and Individual Talent, and after a short discussion on general conception of this essay, I will mainly focus on what tradition is and how tradition can be acquired, and I will tell you the conception of T.S. Eliot's how tradition can be acquired by whom. Okay, so my dear students, look at the board. Tradition and Individual Talent, it is such an essay which was published in 1990 in the literary supplement, in the Times literary supplement. Look at, it was published in 1919 in the Times literary supplement. Dear students, it was published in 1919 in the Times literary supplement as a critical article. I have told you that it is one of the most famous critics of the world. This essay may be regarded, dear students, this essay may be regarded as an unofficial manifesto of Eliot's critical creed. Dear students, we can regard it, or it may regarded as an unofficial manifesto of Eliot's critical creed. Look at, it is an unofficial manifesto of Eliot's critical creed because it contains those critical principles, for which his criticism has been derived ever since. So it is an unofficial manifesto of Eliot's critical creed because those critical principles from which it has been derived ever since. My dear students, now I would like to talk about the main parts of this famous essay. In our last class, I talked about this. The essay of T.S. Eliot named Tradition and Individual Talent has mainly three parts. Look at. There are three parts. There are three parts of this famous essay. The first part, that is part 1. Part 1 is about concept of tradition. Dear students, as I have told you that tradition and individual talent is mainly with three parts. The first part is about the concept of tradition, and the second part, you can say part 2. Part 2 is about the concept of the impersonality of poetry. Look at part 2 is about the concept of the impersonality of poetry, and part 3 is about the conclusion of the whole discussion. Dear students, these 3 parts can be useful to you to understand this famous essay. The first part is about the concept of tradition. That is, in this part, T.S. Eliot, this famous scholar, has expressed the concept of tradition. Actually, this is not the general concept of tradition. It is actually his critical conception of tradition. And part 2 is about the concept of impersonality of poetry. Here in this part, he has talked about how poetry should be impersonal. What are the ways by which poetry can be created impersonally? Okay. And the last one is about the conclusion of these 2 parts. That means he has summed up the 2 parts in the 3rd part. So my dear students, now I'd like to tell you how tradition can be acquired. And if you can understand the definition of tradition, and if you can understand how tradition can be acquired or obtained, I think you will be able to know why T.S. Eliot has written this famous critical essay. Now, I'd like to give you a clear conception on how tradition can be obtained, or you can say acquired. Now, our main topic of discussion for today, how tradition can be acquired. Look at the board, dear students. Dear students, now I'd like to discuss on a certain point about how tradition can be acquired. Dear students, tradition doesn't mean a blind adherence. Tradition doesn't mean a blind adherence to the ways of the past or previous generation or generations. Tradition doesn't mean a blind adherence. Look at please. Tradition does not mean a blind adherence to the, look at, tradition does not mean a blind adherence to the ways of the previous generation or generations. This is a very important line to understand the concept of tradition. Look at this. This word is very important, blind. That is, the poet will not blindly follow the tradition of the past. Okay, that's why you can say tradition does not mean a blind adherence to the ways of the previous generation or generations. Okay, this word, or you can say this word, may be more slavish imitation or a more repetition of what has already achieved. So tradition would be, if you inherit from the past, tradition would be, look at the board please, tradition would be mere slavish imitation of the past, and it may be what has already been achieved. So T.S. Eliot has said that we will not imitate the past. Actually, we will create. Now look at T.S. Eliot has said another thing. Tradition in the passive imitation is to be discouraged. That is, if anybody imitates tradition passively, it should be discouraged. Look at the board. This is a very, very important line. Tradition in the passive imitation. Dear students, tradition in the passive imitation is to be discouraged. What does it mean? What does the lines mean? That means T.S. Eliot wants to say that if anybody wants to imitate, if any writer or if any poet remains passive, and if he only imitates, he should be discouraged. Actually, tradition is a matter of much wider significance. Look at this. Tradition is a matter of much wider significance. We need to understand this line. Tradition is a matter of much wider significance. Okay, tradition in the truest sense of the term, dear students, tradition in the truest sense of the term cannot be inherited. Look at please. Tradition in the true sense of the term cannot be inherited. Look at this. Tradition in the true sense of the term cannot be inherited. It can only be gained by hard labor. Look at this line. This is a very, very important line to understand the concept of tradition. And we are talking about the first concept of tradition. So my dear students, now look at, I'd like to go deeper into this conception. I have told you that tradition in the true sense of the term cannot be inherited. It can only be gained by hard labor. This labor is the labor of knowing the past writers. This labor is the labor of knowing about the past writers. This labor is the labor of knowing the past writers. That means a poet has to labor hard, a poet has to toil hard, or you can say work hard to know about the past writers. Okay, it is the critical labor Look at this. It is the critical labor of shifting from bad to good. Look at this is very important. This labor is the labor of knowing about the past writers. That is, a poet has to know about the past poets or writers, and that's why অর্থাৎ in order to know about the past writers he has to work a lot. And I have again told you, it is the critical labor of shifting from bad to good. Okay, it is the labor of knowing what is good and useful. Look at these two lines, dear students. I have almost come to an end. This labor is the labor of knowing about the past. That means we need to know about the past, and in order to know about the past we need to work hard. We need to know about the previous writers. Okay, it is the critical labor of shifting from bad to good. It is the labor of knowing what is good and useful. T.S. Eliot has said or has expressed an excellent way or excellent thought in this famous essay. Actually, T.S. Eliot want to say that tradition can be obtained by those who have historical sense. I have told you that tradition cannot be inherited from the past. It can only be gained by hard labor. But question arises, who can gain this tradition? I have told you that tradition cannot be obtained. Tradition cannot be inherited. Rather, it can be obtained by those who have historical sense. Dear students, you are requested to keep it in mind that tradition can only be obtained by those who have historical sense. This historical sense involves a perception. This historical sense involves a perception. This perception is not only the pastness of the past but also of its present. Look at this. I need to write tradition can be obtained by those who have historical sense. Who have historical sense. This sense involves a perception. Not only the pastness of the past but also of its presence. Look at this. Tradition can be obtained by those who have historical sense. This sense involves a perception, and that is not only the pastness of the past but also of its presence. My dear students of master's level, today I have already clarified the concept of tradition and how tradition can be obtained and by whom. Actually, with this or by saying this, I can say that you have got a piece of, or you can say a clear conception about the concept of tradition given by T.S. Eliot, and how tradition can be obtained has been in your memory. Now, I'd like to come to an end, but before coming to an end, I'd like to tell you that in order to complete this whole text, I will conduct 6 classes. And from this class, it has been, I think, an opportunity for you to know about the concept of tradition and how tradition can be inherited. I would like to talk about more in my upcoming lectures, and I have told you that I will conduct another 5 classes excluding this one. So my dear students, this is all for today. Thank you for being with me. I'd like to invite you to my next class, when I will be talking about something more regarding tradition and individual talent. So this is all for today. Thank you. Goodbye.